is arrogant. Okay, I don't have time to tell you all about Peter's life. So here's what I'm going to do. This is when Peter's called. 3 years later is scene 2. Okay, 3 years later. The Bible says, as you have on your outline, that when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say the Son of Man is? Now, we'll get to that in just a minute. But let me tell you about Caesarea Philippi, right, for a moment. So Jesus takes his disciples to Caesarea Philippi, famous city in the time period of Jesus. It's a city that's really, really far away. Okay, if you're watching the news right now and you're seeing those maps of the Middle East, all the stuff happening between the Israelis and the Palestinians and the Syrians, and it just goes on, and the Iraqis, crazy, crazy time of the world right now. Well, there's a place between modern Israel, and modern Syria called the Golan Heights, right? It's a plain that separates those two countries, and up on the Golan Heights was a city called Caesarea Philippi, a really famous city. And here's what the city was famous for. It was famous for lots of things, but it was mainly famous for one thing, and that is there was a temple in Caesarea Philippi to a famous pagan god. The god's name was Pan, P-A-N. That was the god's name. His name was Pan. And they built a temple to Pan on the front of a rock face. And they built it on the front of the rock face because the Jordan River, the famous Jordan River that Jesus was baptized in, that still flows today in that part of the world, the Jordan River emerged from underneath the ground through this cave in this mountain, and then it went all the way through Israel. So up to that point, the Jordan River basically is snow melt. Snow melts from Mount Hermon. It goes underneath the ground, and it emerges from underneath the ground at this point. And it came, at that time period, it came out of a cave, and so they built a temple around the cave to the god Pan. Now, there are a couple of different gods in pagan society 2,000 years ago. Some of the gods were cute little gods that you gave your little kids characters to play with. And some of the gods you didn't get anywhere near because you were scared to death of them. Pan was the latter. Everyone was scared of Pan. But people worshiped Pan for particular reasons. One of the reasons why they worshiped Pan is they believed that if you couldn't have a child, Pan had the special ability to allow you to have a child. And so people would travel for miles and miles and miles, for days and days and days, at the terror of going up to this mountain, to the temple of this pagan god they were terrified of, to make a sacrifice just in case Pan had mercy on them to allow them to have a child. And so they would go there and they would make the sacrifice of their animal, and they would throw the sacrifice where the Jordan River emerged from the mountain where the temple had been built around. And if the sacrifice was accepted by Pan, it vanished in the river. It was believed if the sacrifice was rejected by Pan, it shot the sacrifice out of the river. And if your sacrifice wasn't accepted by Pan, you reversed course. You went days and hours and miles in despair all the way back to your home. And the time between throwing the sacrifice into the temple and waiting to see if Pan had accepted your sacrifice, that experience is what some linguists believe is the source of the word panic. P-A-N, pan-ik, panic, as you wait to see if the pagan god Pan had accepted your sacrifice. It was the most terrifying moment and the most terrifying place. And Jesus takes his disciples all the way to Caesarea Philippi in the shadow of this pagan god. And here's what's amazing. In popular culture in that time period, that hole where the river came out, where they threw the sacrifices in to Pan, it was referred to as the gate of hell. Now listen to what Jesus says. Verse 13 on your outline. It says, when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, where Pan is, he sat his disciples down and he asked his disciples, who do people say that the Son of Man is? And they replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. But what about you? He asked, who do you say that I am? And then Simon Peter answered, and we'll pause and see what he says in a moment. So again, these are real people, real situation. So Jesus sitting certainly in the shadow of pond, right? Because it wasn't a big city and it was up on a mountain. He's sitting there with his disciples and he does a Bible quiz. Okay, like have you ever been to a little Bible school or something? He does a Bible quiz with his disciples and he says, "Hey guys, here's the question. What are people saying about me on the streets?" That's what the question is in our modern vernacular. It's like, what are people saying about me? Who do they say I am? Because people can't really get their head around this Jesus guy, right? He's preaching stuff that sometimes sounds like the Bible. Sometimes it doesn't sound like the Bible because he's saying crazy things about the temple and, about the priesthood and everything else. He's healing people. He's standing up to power. Like, people can't put their head around all the stuff Jesus is saying. So he looks at his disciples, maybe sitting around a campfire or something, and he says, "Hey guys, what are people saying about me on the streets?" And one of the disciples says, "Oh, they're saying you're a prophet." Another guy says, "They're saying you're a teacher." Another guy saying you're just another rabbi. Some of them even think you're Elijah. They just go around and they answer all the questions. And then the Bible says that Peter answered, "I know the answer, Jesus. You're the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I will tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades, or the gates of hell, will not overcome it." What an amazing moment. Jesus, so maybe you're not getting this yet. Okay, so track with me. This is the farthest Jesus ever went in his ministry. He went to the city that's on the way outskirts of town. It took days to get to this city. In the shadow of the gate of hell, in the popular understanding of the time, to make a statement. I am creating my church, and the gate of hell will not overcome it. By the way, it's still true. In thousands of years of history, people have tried to kill Christianity, tried to kill the church over and over and over again. And the stories are amazing. In fact, one of the great reformers said that the church is an anvil that has worn out many a hammer. And it's true. And it's not true because of its force. It's true because of its love that transcends it all. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about Peter. Okay, so here's Peter.